It's a long story, so I'll spare you the details. The bottom line is this. My TV wasn't working. I pushed every button on 2 remotes. Nothing. After a while, it got a little frustrating, so I called IT. And they said to me, it's real simple, plug it in. And I said, I felt a little stupid. You ever felt stupid? Did you ever do something and think, oh, wish I hadn't have done that? Let me ask you another question. Has anybody ever called you stupid? Foolish? Ignorant? Well, to feel foolish or feel stupid or to have somebody call you foolish or stupid is one thing. Suppose God called you that. Wow. Well, he does call some people fools, and he describes them in great detail. So in going through the various subjects in Proverbs, I'd like for us to discuss the fool. So to start talking about the fool in Proverbs, turn to Psalm 14. And you will notice that the first verse says, the fool has said in his heart, there is no God. Now, that sort of lays the foundation for this whole subject. But let me begin by just laying out what I plan to do in this particular discussion. I'm going to do 3 things. First of all, I want to define fool. The second thing I want to do is describe the fool. And as I did with the wise, I'm going to do it by discussing 3 things about the fool. What the fool thinks, what the fool says, and what the fool does. And the third thing I'm going to do is talk about the result of being a fool. Now, with that in mind, let me start with the definition. There are 3 different Hebrew words used for fool. One of them only appears 3 times in the book of Proverbs. That one means to be senseless. And the idea is you lack spiritual perception. And Psalm 14:1 says it all very clearly. The fool has said in his heart, there is no God. He has no spiritual perception. The second Hebrew word that describes a fool or is used of a fool is used 19 times in the book of Proverbs, and it means to despise wisdom. And the third word, which is used 49 times in the book of Proverbs, means to be stupid. The Hebrew word means to be stupid, to be arrogant, to be closed-minded. So this kind of person rejects information. Now, those 3 words and Psalm 14 sort of sum up the definition of a fool. It is somebody who lacks spiritual perception, is just plain stupid, arrogant, and they go so far as to despise wisdom. There's more to that one, which we'll discuss in a second. But that's the basic definition. Now, I said the second thing I wanted to do was describe them. And that I would do that by looking at what they think, what they say, and what they do. Now, there's just a lot of Proverbs, as I just said. One word appears 49 times. So what I'm going to do is in each of these categories just give you a number of Proverbs. I don't expect you to remember all of this. What I want you to do is get the basic idea. In the case of the fool, it starts with, the fool has said in his heart, there is no God. Now you might think, oh, that's good, because he's not talking about me today. He's talking about somebody that doesn't know the Lord. And while that is true, it doesn't necessarily mean I'm not talking about us, because we can play the fool. The idea is the fool does not acknowledge God. And in some of the things we think, say, and do, we don't acknowledge the Lord. In other words, we are a practical atheist. We practice what they do in ignoring God. So in that sense, some of this may apply to all of us at different points in our lives, even though we may know the Lord. But let me tell you what the book of Proverbs says about the way the fool thinks. Beyond the fact that they say there is no God, that's what they think. Proverbs 17:16 says, they have no desire for wisdom. That verse says, why is there any hand of a fool the purchase price of wisdom, since he has no heart for it? There's no purchase price in his hand. He doesn't buy it. He doesn't do anything to get it because he doesn't have a heart for it. A young man can spend a lot of money going to university, hoping to learn, and then squander his time while he's there and not even learn knowledge. So he pays a price and doesn't really gain the maximum out of the experience. In a similar fashion, a fool doesn't have a heart to really learn wisdom, doesn't have the price of it in his hand. The book of Proverbs also says he not only does not desire it, he hates it. Proverbs 1:22 says, how long, you simple ones, will you love simplicity? For scorners delight in their scorning, and fools hate knowledge. And as I've mentioned before, in the book of Proverbs, knowledge is a synonym for wisdom. And that verse just flat out says they hate knowledge. The simpleton, whom we will get to later, is ignorant. The fool is worse than ignorant. He hates wisdom. Proverbs 1:7 says, he not only hates it, he despises it. That verse says, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge, but fools despise wisdom and instruction. They hold wisdom in contempt. 15:5 says, a fool despises his father's instruction, and he who receives correction is prudent. The fool considers his father's ideas out of date, old-fashioned, and his instruction of wisdom worthless. So the fool hates wisdom, despises wisdom, and the truth of the matter is, it's just all beyond him. Proverbs 24:7 says, wisdom is too lofty for a fool, and does not open his mouth at the gate. It's just beyond him. 17:24 says, wisdom is in the sight of him who has understanding, but the eyes of the fool are on the ends of the earth. And the idea is that the wise people have wisdom before their eyes, but fools look at the end of the earth for wisdom, and they never find it. So they hate wisdom, they despise wisdom, it's beyond them. But now we're going to really get to the core of the issue. Proverbs 12:15 says, the way of the fool is right in his own eyes, but he who heeds counsel is wise. The fool's standard for determining right from wrong is his own opinion. You can't tell a fool anything. He knows everything and doesn't listen to wisdom. Do you know anybody like that? Have you ever been like that? Anyway, he thinks he's wise. So they trust themselves. 28:26 says, he who trusts in his own heart is a fool, but whosoever walks wisely will be delivered. Someone has said, this is like casting the anchor in their own boat. They trust themselves. And in the process, they deceive themselves. 14:8 says, the wisdom of the prudent is to understand his way, but the folly of the fool is deceit. The contrast in this verse suggests that deception is self-deception. They trust themselves, and consequently they are deceived, and they don't even know it. 15:21 says, folly is joy to him who is destitute of discernment, but of understanding walks uprightly. In other words, the fool enjoys their folly. A stupid man enjoys his stupidity. But here's the ultimate. You with me so far? This is what he thinks. He hates wisdom. He despises wisdom. It's way beyond him. What he really does is thinks he's right about everything. He trusts himself, but he's really deceived. And he enjoys it. He thinks he's right. But here's the ultimate. One more about what he thinks. The foolishness of man twists his ways, and his heart frets against the Lord. The ultimate of the way this guy thinks, or woman, is they ultimately blame the Lord. They not only hate wisdom and despise it, and it's beyond them, and they think they're right. If they keep going down that road, it won't be long before they will ultimately blame the Lord for their stupidity. A businessman undertakes a business venture in which he's not qualified. He neglects his business, and then his business fails, and he blames the Lord. That's a simple illustration. In 2017, Bill O'Reilly, the highly successful Fox News broadcaster, was fired because of allegations of sexual harassment. In one case, he paid $32 million to settle a sexual harassment allegation. He said he'd settled it to protect his children. He emphatically denied the claim, insisting that his wealth and fame had made him the target of such accusations. At one point, O'Reilly blamed the reports of his alleged sexual misconduct on the media. He said, "I truly believe that these people at the New York Times are out to hurt people with whom they disagree. They don't want me in the marketplace. That's what this is all about." Then, on his website, No Spin News, he said, I'm mad at God. Yeah, I'm mad at him. I wish I'd had more protection. I wish this stuff didn't happen. I can't explain it to you. Yeah, I'm mad at him. That's unbelievable. He ruined his career and blamed God. I've had people tell me that, not many, but over the years. I've had people sit in front of me, tell me about something that happened in their life, and they out and out said it was God's fault. I've had others who didn't say it, but it was obvious they were thinking it. Now, that's a fool. That person is just plain stupid. That's what God said. That's what the Hebrew word fool means. Stupid. 49 times. Stupid. But that's what he thinks. If that isn't bad enough, let me tell you what comes out of his mouth. And again, I'm just going to read a number of Proverbs. The lips of the wise dispense knowledge, but the heart of the fool does not do so. That is, he doesn't dispense knowledge because his heart is the problem. In other words, the idea of this Proverbs is there's no wisdom in his heart, so it doesn't come out of his mouth. What they do is say what they think. So Proverbs 14:33 says, wisdom rests in the heart of him who has understanding, but what is in the heart of the fools is made known. In other words, so whatever's in his heart comes out of his mouth. And it's not wisdom. We saw that in Proverbs 15:7. But in 14:33, what comes out of his mouth is what's in his heart. By the way, that's true of just about everybody. And just about every time. What comes out of their mouth. As the heart, as a man thinketh, so he speaketh. That's what happens. And so with a fool, he just says what he thinks. I know of a proprietor of a business who was criticizing his customers in front of a customer. Now that's just plain stupid. 18:2 says, a fool has no delight in understanding, but in expressing his own heart. In other words, a fool has a closed mind and an open mouth. And what comes out of it is foolishness. As a matter of fact, 15:14 says, the heart of him who has understanding seeks knowledge, but the mouth of the fools feeds on foolishness. And 15:2 says, the tongue of the wise use knowledge rightly, but the mouth of fools pours forth foolishness. Did you hear that? The mouth of the fool pours forth foolishness. It gets worse. 19:1 says, better is the poor who walks in his integrity than he who is of perverse lips and is a fool. In other words, he not only speaks what he thinks, what comes out is perverse. Only this verse is saying you'd be better off being poor and honest than being rich and having perverse things come out of your mouth. Or 14:9 says he mocks sin. Fools mock sin. That's a quotation. But among the upright there is favor. 18:6 says a fool's lips enter into contention and his mouth calls for blows. So he mocks sin and then he provokes strife. Only 23 says it is honorable for man to stop striving, since any fool can start a quarrel. There's a progression in putting all these verses together. But let me go one more. 18:7 says a fool's mouth is his destruction, and his lips are a snare to his soul. So there is contention, that's 18:6. Then there's physical violence, and then there is destruction of a fool. A number of Proverbs really highlight the fact this fool is headed for destruction. For example, 10:8 says, the wise in heart will receive commandments, but the prating fool will fall. 10:10 says, he who winks his eye causes trouble, but a prating fool will fall. 10:14 says, wise people store up knowledge, but the mouth of the fool is near destruction. 10:21 says, the lips of the righteous feed many, but the fools die for lack of wisdom. And 14:3, in the mouth of fools is a rod of pride, but the lips of the wise will preserve them. In other words, what a fool says is only going to become the rod that's used to strike him. But I've just quoted several Proverbs, but I want you to see that there is a progression. There is contention, then there's the threat of physical violence. I'm reminded of road rage. And then there is destruction. And what the book of Proverbs underscores time and time again is that he's headed for failure. He's headed for destruction. On top of all of that, with his mouth he spreads slander. 10:18 said, whoever hides hatred has lying lips, and whoever spreads slander is a fool. Then on top of that, people then get to the place where they don't expect wisdom from a fool. So 17:7 says, excellent speech is not becoming a fool, much less lying wits to a prince. So the advice is just be quiet. 17:28 says, even a fool is counted wise when he holds his peace. When he shuts his lips, he is considered perceptive. So if your heart's full of folly, and it's constantly coming out of your mouth, maybe one of the lessons you could learn is just shut up. There's an Arab proverb that says, silence is covering the stupid. A fellow named James Sinclair suggests, At times it is better to keep your mouth shut and let people wonder if you are a fool rather than open it and remove all doubt. A wealthy grandfather who was not quite deaf decided to buy a hearing aid. 2 weeks later, he stopped by the store and reported that he could now pick up conversations quite easily, even in the next room. The clerk said, "Your relatives must be very happy to know that you can hear so much better." "Oh, I haven't told them yet," the man said. "I just have been sitting around listening, and you know what? I changed my will twice." I've told you what he thinks, told you what he says. I want to tell you how he acts. A number of Proverbs describe that. 17:22 and 23 says that he's unaware of his consequences. Those verses say, "Immediately he went after her, as an ox goes to the slaughter, or a fool to the correction of the stocks, till an arrow struck his liver, as birds hasten to the snare. He did not know it would cost him his life." Now, the context of Proverbs 7 in that passage is a man going to see a prostitute. And the point is, he's unaware of the consequences. It's sort of like a criminal who doesn't realize what is happening until he is in handcuffs. Or 29:11 says he can't control his anger. He vents all feelings, but a wise man holds them back. The Hebrew word translated feelings means spirit, and it's used here, many claim, of temper, especially anger. Fools talk about all their feelings, especially anger, and fools let loose the anger. 12:16 says, "A fool's wrath is known at once, but a prudent man covers shame." 14:16 says, "A wise man fears and departs from evil, but a fool rages and is self-confident." You ever met a fool that was so angry he couldn't control his anger? There's a story on television news. A couple of teenagers were playing a prank on somebody and they got the wrong house and they rang the doorbell. Did you hear that story? And the man inside got angry, got in his car and chased them and deliberately ran into them. And they crashed into a tree and 3 of them died because they rang his doorbell. Can't control their anger. Wow. Proverbs 27:3 says, "A stone is heavy and sand is weighty, but the fool's wrath is heavier than both." Did I quote 14:16? "A wise man fears and departs from evil, but the fool's rages and is self-confident." They're just so convinced they're right. They get angry. "I'm right. I know I'm right." Sometimes it spews out of their mouth. 13:16 says they act foolishly. "Every prudent man acts with knowledge, but a fool lays open his follies. They do not think, and consequently they do stupid stuff." And then they repeat it. Proverbs 26:11 says, "As a dog returns to his own vomit, so a fool repeats his folly." You know, it's not bad enough that you do something stupid. It's that you do it again and again. That's what fools do. Matter of fact, that verse is quoted in 2 Peter 2:22 to describe people who return to their folly. Matter of fact, 19:10 in Proverbs says, "Luxury is not fitting for a fool, much less for a servant who rules over princes." They can't handle luxury. They either get a great inheritance or win the lottery, and they spend all their money. And in short order, have you heard the statistics? That people who win the lottery spend it all in, the one report I heard said 14 months. That's just stupid. Win millions of dollars and go through it in 14 months. If they won the lottery again, they'd do the same thing. 21:20 says, there is desirable treasure of oil in the dwelling of the wise, but the foolish man squanders it. Fools have nothing because they squander their gains. By the way, do you have a savings account? Do you live according to your means or above your means? You know, a big problem in this country is people. I've heard all kinds of statistics. $8,000 in credit debt. Do you have any idea what compound interest is doing to you when you have credit card debt? If you don't, you need to have a talk with me at lunch. I'll give you a demonstration. It's scary. But that's what fools do. They squander their gain. You ought to have a savings account. Say, I can't afford it. That's what I'm talking about. You need to start. If it's $5 a month, start. As a matter of fact, reputable financial planners would say that you should have 6 months' living expenses in a liquid account. That is standard financial advice from financial planners. I used to be in the business. That was the advice we gave people. And if you're self-employed, it should be a year. Why? Because if you lose your job, it might take that long for you to get another one. However, if you're married and both of you have an income, some would reduce it below 6 months, maybe even 3. But the point is, you need to not squander all the money you make as you make it. That's what fools do. They squander their money. Proverbs 10:23 says, they sin. To do evil is like sport to a fool, but a man of understanding has wisdom. In other words, fools enjoy doing evil. 13:19 says, a desire accomplishes is sweet to the soul, but it is an abomination to fools to depart from evil. They abhor, they detest. It is disgusting to them to stop sinning. Unbelievable. All of which puts them in danger. So Proverbs 17:12 says, let a man meet a bear robbed of her cubs rather than a fool in his folly. That's a particularly vivid proverb. At the time Solomon wrote this, the rage of the large brown bear in Syria over the loss of her cubs was, quote, fierce and unmanageable. Such anger, raging bull is not as dangerous as a fool who loses his temper. Once he gets that crazy ideas into his head, nothing stops him. They are less rational than a wild beast. So, fools, but their actions put them in danger. So consider meeting a fool with a knife or gun, or even behind the wheel of a car, as not as dangerous as a mother bear who just lost her cub. So would you play with a mother bear who just lost her cub? No. Well, then don't be careful with a fool. All right, what am I saying? I'm saying fools are stupid. It's because of what they think. It's expressed in what they say. And in what they do ultimately has dire consequences. They can't control their anger. They act foolishly. They go back and repeat their anger. They sin. They enjoy sinning. In short, they're stupid. Several decades ago, in Akron, Ohio, a large spider worked tirelessly for many days attempting to spin a web on the moving hands of a large clock. Again and again, she attempted to attach her lines to the two hands of the clock, only to see them broken as the hands of the clock moved further apart. She repeated that same mistake to the point of utter frustration. Finally, after 21 days, she quit, completely exhausted. Fools try to weave webs on the hands of a clock. You are barking up the wrong tree. It's utterly stupid. That sound too strong? That's the direct translation of what God said about a fool. Now, what I've done so far is define a fool. Basically, they leave God out, and so they're stupid. That's the definition. The description is there's no wisdom in their heart. They think they're right. You can't teach them anything. They think they know everything. You can pick that up by what comes out of their mouth. Just listen. And they're headed for destruction. Let me tell you what the result is. It's the way they act. But I got a little ahead of myself. Here's the results of being a fool. Some of you will recognize this quite readily. Let me tell you one of the great results of being a fool. The book of Proverbs talks about this over and over again. One of the great results of being a fool is that you will cause your parents pain. Just listen as I quote some of the Proverbs. 17:21. He who begets a scorner does so to his sorrow, and the father of a fool has no joy. 17:25. A foolish son is a grief to his father, and bitterness to her who bore him. Parents are emotionally affected. 19:13. A foolish son is the ruin of his father, and the contentious wife are continually dripping. 10:1 says, a wise son makes a glad father, but a foolish son is a grief to his mother. And I don't have the time to go into all the details, but the way this is worded, it seems like that the son causes the mother primarily grief. Boy, that's true. You ever known parents of a foolish son? It grieved them deeply. 15:20. A wise son makes a father glad, but a foolish son despises his mother. What an interesting statement. The idea is he disregards what she taught him. So it's tantamount to contempt. He despises her. So the result of being a fool is that you're going to cause pain to your parents, but you're also going to cause pain to other people. 30:21 says, for 3 things on the earth is disturbed. Yes, for 4 it cannot bear up. Verse 22 goes on to say, for a servant when he reigns, a fool when he is filled with food. Now, the point of all of that is this. There are 4 things that agitate people. There are 4 things that are hard to endure. And one of them is this fool who is filled with food. This idea is he's undeserving, living without care and without want of anything. And yet, he's being fed. So much the more he's arrogant and troublesome and dangerous and aggravates people. Or 26:10 says, the great God, and that's in italics, who formed everything gives the fool his hire and the transgressor his wages. Now this verse needs a little explanation because the word God in 26:10 is in italics, meaning it's not in the Hebrew text. And so we have to supply something like God or a great man or an archer. Well, for a whole bunch of reasons that I'm not going to take time to go into, I don't think God is the word that should be supplied here. But then if you supply the word great man, you're talking about somebody perhaps like an employer who hires this person. And the idea then would be that you hire a fool and it's going to cause you great grief. If you ever hired anybody like these, you know exactly what I'm talking about. 26:6 says, he who sends a messenger by the hand of a fool cuts off his own feet and drinks violence. In other words, if you send a fool to deliver a message, it's like cutting off the feet. It doesn't get done, and that causes you no end of grief. Proverbs 11:29 says, he who troubles his own house will inherit the wind, and the fool will be a servant to the wise at heart. So, he does what he wants to satisfy his own greed, and he ends up a servant to the wise. So one of the results is you're going to grieve your parents. Another is you're going to grieve other people, especially if somebody hires you. And then, eventually you're going to become the servant. You're not going to get on top. You think you will, you never will, being a fool. So you're going to become the servant to a wise man. Now, if all that is not significant enough, it gets down to this. One of the results of being a fool is there's very little hope for them. Proverbs 27:22 says, though they grind a fool in a mortar with a pestle, it says, along with the crushed grain, yet his foolishness will not depart from him. Now, in order to understand this, you got to imagine a bowl with a little rod in it used to crush things in it. They had this as a symbol in a drugstore. You ever seen that? They crush pills in that little bowl. Well, in the ancient world, they did that to separate the chaff from the wheat. And so what this proverb is saying is that it's not going to work. By pounding wheat, you can separate the wheat from the chaff, but no amount of pounding will separate a fool from his folly. So you can separate wheat from a chaff, but you can pound a fool and it's just never going to separate him from his folly. Very little hope for a fool. 26:12 says, do you see a man wise in his own eyes? There is more hope for a fool than for him. Now remember, previously he described a fool as somebody who was wise in his own eyes. This is very interesting. But the point is, there's very little hope for a fool. The book of Proverbs does not seem to hold out much hope. They despise wisdom and instruction, 1:7. They hate knowledge, 1:22. They mock sin, 14:9. They consider departing from sin an abomination, 13:19. They repeat their folly, 26:11. They die for a lack of wisdom, 10:21. A simple rebuke to a wise man is more effective than 100 blows to a fool, 17:10. So the Bible says in 26:5, answer a fool according to his folly, lest he be wise in his own eyes. Maybe there's a glimmer of hope if you answer a fool according to his folly, and if he gets it, he won't be wise in his own eyes. But 29:20 says, do you not see a man hasty in his words? There's more hope for a fool than for him. Some people have no control over their tongue. Basically, the result is this. They are going to grieve their parents. They're going to grieve other people who try to work with them. And there's not much hope for them. Oh, there is a little, not much. So, what I'm saying is this, to sum it all up. Fools reject God, hate and despise wisdom, think they are wise, trust themselves, say what they think, which means speaking foolish and perverse things, mock sin, spread slander, provoke strife, do not control their anger, act foolishly, sin, and as a result grieve their parents, cause pain to others, and leave themselves with little hope. You can remember all that? Not likely. So let me boil all this down. Matter of fact, in a previous message in this series, I said, life consists of choices, and choices have consequences. Remember that? Did you write that down? This is one of the most important lessons I want you to learn from Proverbs. And I'm taking that from the fact that very often wise and fool are put in the same verse. They're contrasting to each other. And the idea is you got to make a choice between the two. So I've separated them and given a whole message on the wise. And now I've given a whole message on the fool. And I've got one more coming. I'm going to tell you how to deal with the fool. That ought to be interesting. That's next time. That was a commercial. But the point is that you have to make a choice. You can be wise or you can be stupid. And there are consequences. I think this is what parents need to teach their children over and over and over again. You can choose, but just remember, choices have consequences. Have I made that clear? We got that? All right, I'm going to change it. I'm going to add something to it. And what I'd like to say is this. You can control your choices, but you cannot control the consequences. And that needs to be taught to little children and God's children. You need to tell it over and over again. You need to say to them, you can make a choice. That has consequences. And now I'm going to add, and you don't have control over your consequences. If you go down the road of stupidity, you're going to hurt other people as well as have people not listen to you. That's what's going to happen. So wise people desire, listen to, and think about, and apply, and speak godly wisdom. And as a result, they help people, and they accomplish great things. And fools do the exact opposite. So if there's any practical lesson for each of us, is don't be a fool. The fool has said in his heart, there is no God. Don't be that stupid. That's a pretty blunt sermon, isn't it? And then what do? How about Proverbs 3, 5, and 6? Trust in the Lord with all your heart, and lean not on your own understanding, and He will direct your path in the path of wisdom and righteousness, which we will get to later. Trust the Lord. Don't ignore Him. That's stupid. Trust the Lord. Don't lean on your own understanding. That's really dumb. You think you know everything? Trust the Lord and lean not on your own understanding. There was once a man who took pity on a wounded parrot. He cared for the bird until its broken wing was healed. Then came the day for the bird to be released, and the bird said to him, in appreciation for your help, I want to give you 3 words of wisdom. Don't believe everything you hear. Don't attempt what is beyond your limitation. And when you make a mistake, forget it and plan for tomorrow. The man then released the bird. The bird flew to a low hanging limb and continued. You used poor judgment in setting me free, because inside me there is a priceless diamond that would have made you rich. The disappointed man climbed the tree to capture the bird, but it flew to a higher limb, obviously to danger. The man pursued. Sadly, the flimsy limb broke away, and the man fell, breaking his leg. The parrot then said, if you were wise, you would have listened to me. You believed a gross exaggeration. You tried to catch me with your hands, which is impossible. And when you failed, you didn't learn by your mistake, but you did something even more foolish. That's the best parable of a fool I've ever read. Fools believe like that. They don't listen. They believe the wrong thing, and they try to live in their own strength instead of the Lord's. And consequently, there is little hope for a fool. Benjamin Franklin said, "We're all born ignorant, but one must work very hard to remain stupid." Father,